We got two special ones
Excellent.
here.
We sure do. We have Matt Gonzalez and Tricia Zunker. I'll just give a quick brief introduction for people. Tricia Zunker, very rare that my name is also someone else's name, so I'm very happy to meet you. A Democratic candidate for Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District. And Matt Gonzalez, Chief Attorney of the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. Welcome to the Tightrope. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing
great.
so great tonight. So great to be here.
So tell us a little bit, just give us a little bit each. I'll start with Tricia. I have name bias, Tricia, tell us what you thought. What was your overall sense of this debate? How did you think it went? What stood out for you?
Well, I mean, it was horrifying. The campaigns agreed to rules in advance, and then it was clear from the outset that Vice President Pence had no desire to follow the rules. I mean, he was already interrupting just with the first question. By the time he got to the second question, he didn't follow basic debate rules of answering that question and answered the question he wanted to answer, which was continue to talk about the original question, the first question. And I think it might have been the fourth or fifth question where it was Senator Harris's turn to answer, and he just jumped in. I thought, this is just such disrespect. It's horrifying. And it's not even just about treating your opponent with some respect. Senator Harris was there. She made history tonight on that debate stage. And he was just being so rude, so horrific, but also to the voters that tuned in, that actually wanted to hear real answers. And we didn't get them because it was his behavior. And I have to say, I know Dr. West, at the start, you said something to the effect of, could it get any lower? I can't imagine it going any lower. And something I learned on the campaign trail is after we had to go virtual in the spring with the pandemic, and I'd make calls to so many voters and see how they're doing through it. And you think the news can't get worse. You think Donald Trump can't do a worse thing. I had so many calls with people. Sometimes I felt like I was counseling them, not really earning votes or checking in, but just counseling. And the thing is that I've learned is things can always get worse. So I don't want to say that we're foreshadowing the next presidential debate, or I don't have a crystal ball here, but I think we might see some worse behavior.
Yeah. Matt, what was this is Tricia, that was right on target in my opinion. Matt, what were your thoughts about the debate we just saw?
Well, I thought Harris won the debate. I thought the differences were fairly apparent. I thought the moderator certainly had a hard time trying to deal with with Pence wanting to talk beyond his time. But I don't know that without the power to cut off the mic that she really had many levers that she could try to sort that out with. The part that I would have liked to have seen is I would have liked to have seen her push the candidates when they fail to answer a question. So for instance, when Harris was asked the question about whether or not Biden would support new lockdowns if he were elected, as a result of COVID, or when Pence was asked specifically about Trump's medical records or taxes or things like that, they instead gave answers that seemed, pre-prepared and didn't answer. And I would have liked the moderator just to come back and say, hey, tell me yes or no, do you support this or not? I think the most troubling thing, though, for me in watching Harris, and I want to respect her because I think she really did a very fine job with Pence. But I want to say that the repudiation of progressive ideas like a Green New Deal or ending fracking, that was just unfortunate to have to watch because leadership is about trying to move consciousness on issues like that rather than just taking the temperature of where the American public is right now and then deciding that these ideas can't be defended. But I think that if they vigorously went after them, they could move the American public.
Yeah, I hear. I mean, that is the hope, right? But I guess the question is, how much can you move them in this venue, in this context, given the sort of circus that the debate structure provides, because you need some capacity to unpack it. But you're right. She did rock back on her heels. The other question that Pence completely ignored was, how are you going to not let go of people with pre-existing conditions in your fantasy new non-affordable care act healthcare, right? What are you going to specifically do? He didn't even try to answer that question whatsoever.
That's true. That's true. Or when Sister Harris said, well, your boss did not denounce white supremacy. And Brother Pence says, he's got Jewish relatives. He's got Jewish, God bless all of them. All of them are precious. That's not an answer to the question at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the real question is, in the battleground states that voted for Trump, 4 years ago, whatever the number of the universe of voters that is, 8 million voters, that are going to decide this election. The question is, did Pence appeal to them with these answers like the one Dr. West is pointing out? And it didn't sound convincing to me. It's hard to believe that could have moved voters, but given what happened 4 years ago, we have to remain concerned. And even with Biden in the lead by, let's say, 8 points or 10 points in those states, that just means Trump Pence have to move 4 or 5 percentage points into their column to make it a dead race. They're going to clearly lose, I think, the popular vote. It's only down to, I think, to the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm in one of those states. I'm in Wisconsin, and I'm running for a district that's a third of the state, and running very hard to make sure that we have a Biden victory here in Wisconsin, because we know as goes Wisconsin, so goes the country. But to go back to that earlier point about Mike Pence not answering the question, there's a debate philosophy, and I'm not saying I subscribe to this, but I have been I've been through a special election already this year, and moved the needle over 6 points against 4 times the money, and got right back on the horse to finish the job November 3rd. So I've been through a couple of debates, and I have 3 more coming up starting next week. And there's a philosophy of answer the question you want, right? Not the one that's asked. I'm not saying I do that, but I think that's what Pence was doing tonight. And I think we might give some people a little too much credit, because sometimes people aren't paying attention to the questions that's being asked, and they just like that answer that they're hearing. And Pence is counting on that, and Trump is counting on that they're just going to say things over and over that appeal to their voters. And one other thing from tonight's debate is I was just so impressed with Senator Harris, because I thought she could have been even tougher. And I don't want to say that like a criticism, because I have such admiration for Senator Harris. I am so honored to have received her endorsement for this candidacy. But the thing is, and I was thinking about it as I was watching her, and thinking how I might have to channel that next week in my first of 3 debates, because she had such dignity and she had such poise, which she always does. But I've seen her a little more aggressive, if you will. But the problem is that women are held to such a standard. And if we even say things with just a certain tone, then it's aggressive or temper or what have you. And I've witnessed this. I've experienced it myself. It's wear your hair up. You don't look professional. Wear your hair down. You look too much like a corporate lawyer. You should smile more. You need voice lessons. And this is what women in politics have to deal with. And Senator Harris has dealt with this for a long time. But that's even something that tonight on the debate stage, I'm thinking that is in the back of her mind with her answers as well.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. But do you all notice on the local level, in the debates that you're going to have in the elections on the board, that the political culture itself is as debased at the local level as it is at this national level? Or is there more rigor? Is there more exchange? Is there more real argument, wrestling with issues and facts? I mean, is the empire that deeply in the mire of spiritual decay and public collapse that this is what we dish out to the world. Do you see that on the local level too?
Well, I can tell you that I certainly do. I'm school board president of one of the largest school districts here in Wisconsin, and I don't know if it's just the pandemic and the fact that we are dealing with this avoidable pandemic, and we've got frustrated parents that want their kids in schools, and the taking this tone from the top with Donald Trump and his horrific behavior. But I have to be honest, I had to use my gavel 4 times in the school board meeting last week. And as a judge for my tribe for over 7 years, I never had to use it once. So there's something going on right now. And it's just, pandemic, elections, people are seeing attack ads. It's definitely amplified that I can see here in central Wisconsin.
Brother Matt?
Go ahead, Matt.
I just want to say that I agree with what Tricia said about, I think the big challenge for Senator Harris was the double standard that we all know was going to exist. As a woman of color, there's just no question that it was unclear how she would come across to voters on this kind of national debate stage. I thought her personality came through quite nicely. I thought there were little things that she did, like saying thank you when somebody complimented her or the moderator gave her more time. She listened to Pence with a certain degree of respect, but she also had the very pointed, smile or shaking of her head that seemed very, very appropriate for the moment, for what Pence was talking about. And so I think she succeeded at that. Like I said earlier, I do think the voters get the sense that these are, the differences in these candidates. I don't think that she was as strong against Pence on like the issue of the Supreme Court choice. So for instance, Professor Rose, you raised the issue of sort of what had happened under Obama's at the end of his term. She really didn't use that to show the hypocrisy of the Republicans. And importantly, Biden didn't either in his debate. They went to that issue in other ways. And the thing I would have loved to have heard, I would have loved Harris to say, hey, if you're confident you're going to win the election, why don't you wait till January? The only reason you want to rush this appointment through now is because you're not going to win, and kind of, challenge them that way.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
That's interesting. I'm wondering, whether or not, Tricia, you think, and I guess in your area too, Matt, but especially, how do you think we should respond to the fact that people's, anger over the pandemic is mixing with a kind of racial rage, white racial resentment, a misplaced sense of blame, but also what I think really marks this whole election season, which is a complete saturation of toxic masculinity all the way around. The fact that she, that Kamala couldn't, basically bring all of her weaponry, right? The fact is just constant that women not only have to look a certain way, as you mentioned, but they have to make sure they don't actually slay at the level they can slay, which is a loss to us all. But also the way Mike Pence functioned was really a kind of, a twin, kind of like a topsy-turvy doll to Trump, because Trump is blustery and mean and a bully. And Mike Pence is, a calm executioner of toxic masculinity, right? He brings the exact same kind of concept with a different style. So, when you take all of that's going on with the pandemic, what do you imagine we should be saying, or what are you saying in your areas to sort of create the right kind of framework for people to understand what's going on? Because it is a lot coming at people. What have you been able to share with them?
You're right. It is a lot. And so in the special election in here in Wisconsin, we were already virtual. The special election here was in May. And so the last 9 weeks of the campaign were virtual at that time. And My opponent authorized an attack ad against me that they spent $250,000 on, full of lies. And then he started running a new attack ad against me today. And instead of pointing to any kind of fact, any kind of record, any kind of something that is true, they just run with lies. I think we're just dealing with such fundamental differences. I don't run attack ads because I don't have to. I can go to my opponent's voting record. I can say he's one of 17 Republicans who voted no on the resolution to condemn QAnon last Friday. I don't need to make anything up because his record speaks for itself. And I think that's what we're dealing with, is when you have two vastly different approaches, one that's really trying to work hard for the people. I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to work hard for everybody here in Wisconsin, whether they vote for me or not, because it means something for me to come back to them and say, look, I promised I would do this. And then you have people on the other side who, you know, some dark money is funneling in and buying their seats. It can be very frustrating. I don't mean to sound like it's all doom and gloom, though. I do think there's hope. I do think there's opportunity. And when I reach out to the voters, which is each and every day, I talk about these things. You know, this pandemic, it's become so politicized, but it's not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. It's an American health and safety issue. We have 200,000 plus lives that are lost, 200,000 plus families that are grieving, including my own. My uncle fell victim to COVID-19 here in central Wisconsin not even 5 weeks ago. This is a very real thing. And unfortunately, we have one side that believes more in science, wearing masks, being considerate of others, and other people that just don't want to be inconvenienced, that until they themselves are personally affected, aren't going to take it seriously and equate it to what did Pence do tonight? He equated it to the swine flu, or tried to make the swine flu sound worse. I mean, it's just lying to people, and it's so wrong. And we just have to keep fighting each and every day. And I didn't used to like to use that word fight early on. I used to say things like advocate. But I've been doing this long enough now, and we're fighting. We're fighting for each and every vote.
No, you remember Pence sits there and says Trump is going to follow the scientists. And you said, what world are you living in?
Yeah.
And he says he's
going to follow the scientists who agree with him, which is some scientists he bought.
This is where the journalists have to come in. Somebody's got to intervene on behalf of not just truth, but decency and integrity of exchange. Because once it's so debased, where you can just say anything, then it just becomes an empty theatrical spectacle. And that's what turns people off, and that's what they want to do. You see, they want to beat people down with lies so intensely that they give up on the whole process. That's what fascists do. You see, Reagan didn't do that. Reagan was a right-wing showman from my state, California, you know. Goldwater didn't do that. Goldwater had racist sensibilities, he had racist policies, but he had a certain decency and integrity in how he engaged in exchange. All you got to do is look at his debates with Norman Thomas in the 1960s, you see, or the dialogues with William Buckley that the progressives had. These days, it's so debased that it's hard to get off the ground for any public anything, and that's what I find most disturbing. That's what I mean by fascism. This is not Hitler, Mussolini style. This is U.S. style.
Right.
With white supremacy as its public face. The racism against indigenous peoples and black peoples and brown peoples and Asian. And there's always an ugly anti-Jewish element to it that we have to acknowledge, no matter how accommodated certain right-wing Jews might be at the top. It's still against their people and against their family, because the anti-Jewish element is part and parcel of a fascist movement in America, you see.
Right, yeah.
You know,
Matt, go ahead, Matt.
Obviously I'm from San Francisco, and I held office when Kamala was district attorney. And I have a lot of opinions about her progressivism as it relates to that post. But in this debate, I thought it was really interesting that efforts to try to make it seem like Biden, Harris were somehow in support of looters and the sort of Black Lives Matter protests, and somehow support violence came off as very thin. I thought Harris's being able to say that she had actually prosecuted certain cases gave her a lot of credibility in support of law enforcement. And I thought Pence's whole point about San Francisco, about, if you're African American, you were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted during her tenure. Honestly, listening to that, it just did not ring like this is something he really cares about. And I don't even think Harris really even needed to go toe to toe with him on it. It just was so weak,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we're really reeling from all of these things, the factual confusion, the emotional manipulation, the disrespect. So I like Tricia's point. She's gonna keep fighting, and we just got to keep our heads above this water as much as we can, and encourage people to analyze and to think critically about what they're seeing, and not just fall for the narratives that are being offered. I know we've got to head out soon, so we're gonna have to close down our conversation with the two of you. But it's been great to have you with us on the tightrope. We're all hanging on this rope right about now. So
thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, and
Thank
good
you.
luck, Tricia, with your.
Thank you.
Hang on, keep fighting. All right, thanks, Matt. Good to see you both.